Hey folks, it's Nick with Bootstrap Farmer. Today we're at Urban Dirt Company's trial farm and we're going to be talking about the crops you need to be starting and thinking about in September. Let's get into it.
So the first thing we need to consider is our first frost date. The second thing you're going to want to consider for each of your plants is the date to maturity. That date is either going to be on the back of your seed packet or it's definitely going to be on the website for the seed provider that you go with.
So this is a little bit different in crops behind me, like vine crops, anything that's going to fruit and make something other than a leaf. So we're talking about peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, and cucumbers. Now, in most of the country, if we're looking at early frost dates, we're not thinking about things like tomatoes and the longer term crops. These are short season, quicker crops that we need to look at. Now in this video, we are going to be talking about cucumbers, but in a very specific manner. So just know, days to maturity, we're looking at leafy greens primarily, a lot of herbs, and we're also going to be talking about some perennials that you're going to plant now that you can enjoy over the course of the next spring, and that will then be there for a sweeter harvest next fall. So on that first frost date and days to maturity, one thing that you may want to keep in mind for your area, and again, we're talking to a national audience, so you're going to have to take a look at that first frost date to keep all that in mind. But if you already have infrastructure for low tunnels, or you plan on building some, or if you have something like one of our all-metal Bootstrap Farmer hoop houses behind us, that means that you can further extend the season without having to worry about that first frost date as much. Here's the other great thing about starting some of these varieties in September, is it gives you a window to trial out some new stuff that you may or may not want to incorporate into your main crops next spring. So if you're going to be planting some of these crops in the fall, this is a good time to buy 3 or 4 different varieties of that single crop to see which one works best for you moving on into next season. So now we're going to get into the crops and we're going to go to Carrie.
Our first crop is broccoli. Most of the Brassicas family is about a 70 to 100 day maturity date and thrives in cooler weathers. Planting in September allows for an extended season, even past the first frost date. This allows fresh broccoli florets after other crops are finishing off. Planting brassicas this early also helps to reduce cabbage worms. As you can see, we're planting in raised beds where there's already some low tunnels installed. So this is great for if an unexpected warm day comes, you've still got your shade cloth, but then if you need to, you can take off your snap clamps and put on your frost blankets. And to learn more about that, check out this video.
Our next crop is radish. It pairs nicely with some of the other leafy greens that we're going to be talking about later on in the video, but this is a good 20 to 30 day from direct seed to harvest crop. So we planted this the first week of September. This is a little globe type of radish and it's already ready to go. So the good thing about planting radishes this time of year is it reduces that bitterness that a lot of radishes have and takes a lot of that bite out of some of the spiciness. So again, this is going to pair well with some of the leafy greens we'll talk about next.
Up next is lettuce. It's great for succession planting, but really make note of your days to maturity because some of those can range anywhere from 30 to 55 days. So for this time of year, if you're not in a high tunnel, we really suggest looking at those leafy lettuces. So if you're looking at a head of lettuce like a romaine or a tropicana that has 55 days to maturity and you've only got 40 days to your first frost date, if you don't have that frost blanket coverage, then you might lose that crop. And just like some of the other crops we're looking at, with these, you're going to be seeing crisper, sweeter lettuce that's not going to bolt.
Up next is spinach, looking at 35 to 45 days. These are sweet and tender leaves and perfect in the fall. And just like lettuce, you can pull individual leaves for cut and come again type of crops. Spinach can withstand a light frost, and when you use a frost blanket, you can harvest into the late winter. One of the better crops of spinach to take a look at is Malamar spinach. As you can see, it grows up on a vine, which you can use some of the trellising that you're likely to have in your garden. And it's also one of those things you can pick a lot of leaves off and it's going to continue to grow. It also, to me, is just a little bit more hardy than some of the spinach that you'll typically grow in the ground.
Up next, we have a perennial herb, chives. These are great. They're going to last all the way through a first couple of frosts. And then because they're a perennial, they're going to be one of your first ones to come back in the spring and continue to harvest again.
Our next crop are peas. Now these do have a 60 to 70 day to harvest, but because they can withstand quite a heavy frost, you don't have to worry about that like you would with some of these other crops.
Next up is carrots, which have a 70 to 80 day harvest date. And don't worry about that longer harvest date. The colder it gets, the sweeter carrots become. Planting carrots this time of year also helps to avoid damage from summer pests and carrot flies. When planting carrots in the early fall, many gardeners choose to leave them in the ground and harvest as needed. Carrots can tolerate light frost, and the cooler temperatures can actually enhance their sweetness. Keeping them in the ground acts as a natural storage method, allowing you to enjoy fresh carrots throughout the fall and even into early winter, depending on your climate.
Okay, now we're in front of an empty trellis for our next crop, which is going to be cucumber. And I know that's a little bit counterintuitive from what we said at the beginning of this video when we talked about, hey, indeterminate fruiting crops may be too long to harvest. I would say that by and large, cucumbers are the exception to the rule, and that they do tend to grow quite a bit faster. The fruit comes on quicker and it gets bigger faster. So this is a great way to round up the season. It pairs great in a salad with the radishes we talked about, with the chives, any of the herbs that we're going to go over, the leafy lettuce, of course. It's also going to pair well with some of the crops we're going to plant in October. So up through the very first frost, cucumbers are going to come on. They're going to come on strong. We already took off the plants that grew here in the summertime. We only have 3 vines going. They're going to go straight up. We're going to trellis them out. We're going to do sometimes a double or a triple leader. That way, one plant we can grow multiple vines on and spread the love real fast.
Another leafy green that thrives in the cooler weather is mustards. They have about 30 to 40 days to harvest. Cooler temperatures enhance the flavor profile of mustard greens, making them spicier and more distinct. Mustard greens are frost tolerant and can be harvested well into late fall, providing a fresh supply. And just like leafy greens, you can pull one leaf for a cut and come again harvest.
Before we go to the next crop, you start to see a pattern developing in that some of these plants that tend to get real bitter in the heat, if we plant them now, you have time to get a full harvest while enjoying some of the sweetness that that cooler air brings. We keep saying that over and over again because it's a good point to illustrate that as you're planting your crop, just like we talk about, some of these crops pair well together and some of them are going to be used in dishes across the board. And that when you're planning out a crop, make sure that you're taking a look at that flavor profile and how you're going to use them in the days to come is really going to help narrow down the wide variety of choices. We're only covering a few crops here. Just know that your taste, your market, your weather, all of this plays into. Just because you're not going to plant some of these crops, these are characteristics you may want to look at as you're picking out your seeds. Another crop to consider is sage. Just like the chives earlier, it's going to be a woody stem perennial. Now, going into this time of year, what I've seen as a home cook that cooks a lot, going into Thanksgiving, sage is always out of stock at the grocery store. So why not grow your own? Be able to use the fresh or dried herbs as you like. It also makes a great gift if you want to give your family members something from your garden. Beyond the crops that we're talking about in this video, we're also hoping to give you some frameworks of ways to think about your garden. Now, we've already talked about the shade cloth and the frost blanket, but just know as you do things like build a trellis, where we talked about the cucumbers, and now you're using it for multiple seasons, and it's going to be there for you in the next spring, none of this is time or labor wasted because you'll be able to use it over and over again.
One crop that you can start any time of the year, no matter the season, no matter the weather, is indoor microgreens. Microgreens can give you all the flavor, texture, colors that you might need to spice up any dish. And with 10 to 20 days to maturity, you'll get an instant gratification. We hope you found this video helpful as you start to plan out your garden. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you'll see our other videos as we continue to do these seasonal growings. Don't forget, I'm part of the customer service team. Me and my teammates, we all answer the phone 7 days a week. So make sure you give us a call if you have any questions and comment below and let us know what you're going to be growing this month.